So this happened. Everyone's favorite gloomy hero, Mr. Megumi Fushiguro, is back, and that means all the pieces are finally in place to do a full-length deep dive on Megumi and his seemingly never-ending downfall into despair. Now, as soon as this chapter came out, I had countless people flooding into my inbox, wanting to know my thoughts and expectations, not for Megumi, but for this final finger of Sukuna. And while that in itself is extremely important, as it might very well be the final puzzle piece to defeating Sukuna once and for all, ultimately the fate of the King of Curses rests on the shoulders of Megumi Fushiguro. Because even though everyone has been playing their part in this Shinjuku Jump Fiesta, sacrificing themselves, their humanity, and pushing the limits of their capabilities to sink that Sukuna battleship, the one person who has failed to do anything is Megumi. Now, Megumi is often mischaracterized by the JJK community as being this emo defeatist, ready to sacrifice himself at any point when the going gets tough, and the pity for his circumstances has long been thrown out the window. And in some sense, I can understand the negative backlash. I mean, Megumi has been at the literal core of this conflict, and the only reason why Sukuna is able to persist during these chaotic scales of battle is because he's a parasite using Megumi's body to accomplish his objectives. And the result of all this stuff has been the continued suffering of Megumi's mentality. Megumi is indirectly responsible for the death of Gojo and everyone else in this one-man war arc. Like Yuji, he's faced constant tragedy at every corner, but unlike his friend, he does not have the will nor the spirit to continue going forward. And I think because of this distinction, the JJK community has been especially ruthless of his inability to act. They've even denigrated Megumi, made him out to be this type of joke, demoralizing the struggles he's faced and failing to understand why he's been unable to bounce back like he's freaking Luffy. And that's why in this chapter review, we're going to take a different approach. Instead of analyzing and breaking down all the aspects of this chapter, we're going to center our focus on the Megumi process. Because while Megumi's presence has been completely under the radar for the better part of almost 2 years, he's just as important to the story as Yuji is. So I'll do what I do best and explain why chapter 266 is the most pivotal turning point for his character, and when you reach the end of the video, maybe you'll start to see things from my perspective. But before we get into that, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the noti bell so you don't miss any uploads. And with that, let's get into the unending despair of Megumi Fushiguro. Megumi for a while now has been memed as Mr. Potential Man, and that's because he's someone who allegedly has the same capabilities to reach the same heights as his benefactor, Satoru Gojo. Now, during a Shibuya flashback, Gojo told Megumi the story of the last 6 Eyes and 10 Shadow users, the fate they faced together in their colossal battle 400 years ago, and how that moment plays into Megumi's destiny. In this time period, both users were the heads of their respective clans, of course that being Gojo and Zenin, and they ended up killing each other, which led to this long-term animosity between both of these families. And the Kamo clan, I don't know, they were just dealing with their own problems. But the point of this story was that since Gojo and Megumi were essentially reincarnations of these leaders, and because Gojo was the strongest, it meant that Megumi was able to reach those same heights as well. Those were the expectations that Gojo placed in Megumi. He completely believed in his student, and when his time eventually came to an end, he could die happy knowing that Megumi could eventually carry that torch. Now the issue is that Megumi never had this belief in himself. He never had that motivation or drive to become the strongest, and like Itadori, he was fine with playing his part, and ultimately becoming a cog in the system. Megumi didn't see himself as a hero, and that's why he refused to hold himself as some moral arbiter of justice, who's fighting for the honorable fights and for the sake of some good-hearted reasons. Megumi justifies who he saves based on his own internal compass. If people think he's wrong, well, it doesn't really matter to him. He makes his own decisions based on his conscience, and that's the type of Jujutsu sorcerer that he aimed to be. His purpose for fighting and moving forward was for the sake of his sister Tsumiki. He dreamed of making a world where she could be happy and stand by someone golden-hearted like Itadori. He didn't care what happened to him in the process. As long as he could save selfishly, that was his justice. Megumi wanted to maintain this simple, fragile lifestyle where him and Tsumiki could live and enjoy the bliss of an average life, and that's how he would use his life. The worst thing that he ever wanted to happen was for Tsumiki to experience unreasonable unhappiness, and tragically, that's exactly what happened. So when Megumi discovers that Yorozu possessed his beloved sister, the fact that his beloved sister is no longer with him, his will started to crumble. Now, in the midst of this turmoil, Sukuna, as the classic opportunist that he is, pulls a fast one on Itadori, instantly replacing his consciousness, and with a shell-shocked Megumi in his hands, playing his sacrificial trump card as he always does. It was almost too easy to overcome him. Sukuna takes hold of a mentally distraught Megumi, his soul in shambles, still trying to comprehend the travesty that occurred before him. But it's too late. He becomes a skeleton of his former self. And eventually, when Yorozu forfeits her life to assist Sukuna in manifesting herself into a cursed tool, Megumi hits his lowest point, as his reason for existing is gone. Megumi couldn't do anything to save his sister. His purpose in life was erased, and that's why his will to continue going is so weak. And it doesn't make it any better that he had to sit back and watch while Sukuna killed his teachers, friends, and family. So it makes sense why Megumi is so consumed by his despair. He's walking in a dark tunnel, and he can't see the light at the end. JJK Chapter 266 does an amazing job highlighting how and why Megumi is in this situation, elaborating on why he gave up, and after that fact, you can't really blame him for his reactions up until now. This guy is only 15 years old, and in such a short time span, he's had to bear witness while everything that matters to him just dies. Now, something that Megumi fails to realize, and I think many who have been in this type of desperate position can relate, but when you're drowning in despair, it's often hard to see things clearly. Megumi convinced himself that he's alone in these struggles, but he isn't. He always had people around supporting and helping him out, whether he realized it or not. And there's no person who can relate more to his circumstances than Yuji Itadori. Yuji entered the Jujutsu world with a net negative by losing his grandfather, and this chapter reveals a bit more about the details surrounding that situation. Yuji's grandfather was cursed with lung cancer, and at the early stages he rejected the stronger treatments because he didn't want to deal with the side effects. And so rather than fighting that terrible battle, Yuji's grandpa, like Megumi, chose to give up and accept his circumstances. He euthanized himself, he died alone, and by consequence, he left Itadori alone to figure things out for himself. Now, Itadori was always strong, so he never really understood his grandfather's position until he went through the countless terrible experiences in the Jujutsu world that forced people to certain realities. He learned to empathize with his grandfather's situation, and by extension, he felt compassion for anyone else going through similar hells. So when he witnesses Megumi in this state, he can literally feel his pain. And that's why it's difficult to convince Megumi to live as he is right now, because he knows it won't hit, unless Megumi is able to overtake his depression and overcome himself. But regardless, Itadori still wants to save Megumi from his despair, not just for his sake, but because Itadori is currently living the Gojo experience of isolation. Itadori has been going through a non-stop roller coaster of suffering, like he's Dante entering the 9 circles of hell. People keep dying. He tries to attempt to close this gap between him and Sukuna, but it's just a goddamn uphill battle. Itadori is on his own, fighting against the king, carrying the burden of the world on his shoulders, and he can't do it solo. He's just one person, and he's only human. Itadori doesn't want to live alone, he doesn't want to die alone, so he selfishly wants to save Megumi, so he's not burdened by that destiny. Now, like I said before, Megumi's goal as a sorcerer was to save people that he wants to save. That's why he took his gamble on Itadori at the beginning of the series, because according to his conscience, it was the right thing to do. And despite everything that's happened, that goal has never changed, and even though he's lost everything, there's still that essence that can push him forward onto the next stages. And perhaps seeing Itadori resigned to such a lonely situation stirred something within his soul that's already been dismantled to oblivion in order to awaken him in the first place. Megumi's 10 Shadows activates through Sukuna. Sukuna is bewildered by this plot twist, as Itadori finally succeeds in reviving his friend. And that smile on his face when he realizes that Megumi found his purpose again, and seeing him begin to regain his spirit, that in itself is worth everything. Now, ultimately at this time, it seems like Sukuna's fate solely depends on if Megumi has the will to overcome the dark shadows being casted. So far, it's a good start, but it's still up in the air. It's just the way Jujutsu Kaisen is. There's also Sukuna's finger at the end of the chapter that could foreshadow a potential Nobara return, as she could be the final nail in his coffin. But I completely believe that this instance is the game changer, and hopefully with clear eyes and a strong heart, Megumi can pull through and become the hero that Gojo always envisioned. But what do you guys think? Is Megumi's return set in stone, or is this another one of Gege's dream-crushing sadistic endeavors to troll his fanbase for the trillionth time? Let me know in the comments, and any other predictions you could have for the next chapter. Remember to like and subscribe, smack that notification bell, cause why not? And with that, I'll catch you guys in the next video.